right. Believe we are good to go. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm glad that you guys could make it today. I've got a really good topic. I think that it's going to be a good reminder, refresher for some. But it's all around should you raise your prices and what the math is involved. All right. So um, I would have to say that most contractors believe they can't raise their prices without losing customers. But what if that belief is the exact thing keeping you broke and burned out? Okay. That's the exact thing that's keeping you broke and burned out. So I've had the privilege of coaching on many different contractors over my career, and I have one that I was coaching last year. He was an electrical contractor doing about 1.2 million, and he hadn't raised his prices in 4 years. He was booked out mm, like 4 months, but was still living invoice to invoice. Can anybody relate to this scenario? Has anyone been in it? Maybe give me a one in the chat. Let me see who's going to openly admit to being in this situation. Right. Okay. So how do we get there? Right? What's causing this? All right. And I'm going to go through a couple of different things to do with the mindset around pricing and your prices. All right. Because I've heard just about every excuse that you can imagine under the sun. And I can systematically call them out at this point, and we're going to actually look at it. So your challenge today is really to think about your thoughts, your feelings around pricing, and really look to make some adjustments and start to use data and numbers to actually make those decisions on pricing. So here's what I see happen with most contractors that follow the pathway. You say yes to low margin jobs, which means you work harder but keep less. You can't afford to hire help, so you stay stuck in the field. You can't market your company properly because your pricing is keeping you trapped. So again, when we're talking about competitive pricing, when we really break down and understand our numbers, this is the key. Okay, so here's the aha moment for some of you. When you start to actively run job costing and actively work to understand the numbers and why they are, all right, a beautiful thing begins to happen. Number one is the pain of what you're doing becomes real. Okay, so we can actually fool ourselves, all right, by not looking at our numbers. So here's a good scenario of that. I've had a contractor, again, same gentleman, um, you know, from a few years ago, doing 1.2 million, electrical contractor. All right. And we took one of his jobs, his first job, and he verbally told me before we started in our session that there was zero chance he could raise his prices. I love hearing that. Thank you very much for sharing. Let's go ahead and do a job costing. And we took a 25K project that he had completed, and we worked it out that he made $18 an hour. That was a very painful. Have you ever seen a grown man cry? Because I have, right? When he realized that, hey, you know what? That's not even apprenticeship money. Okay. And how do we get into this situation? How do we find ourselves, in that process? And then again, if when you're first starting out, these things happen. These are the growing pains of building a business and learning. But again, there is a system, there's a formula to skip a lot of that. And I'm going to go through that with you today. And I'm going to hopefully help you guys build a framework around your pricing, and more importantly, keeping your mindset and keeping your feelings and emotions, out of your wallet. All right. So what changed everything for him was realizing it's not about changing or charging more. It's about being more profitable on the work you already do. Okay. So the best way I can kind of explain this scenario to you, it's like carrying buckets of water up the hill every day. Raising your prices, building a pipe, um, some water, same water, less effort, right? So when we think about our pricing, we have to think about it as well as being directly connected to the type of business we want to own. Okay. So I'll give you a good example. Is anyone here woke up this morning and was like, I want to be the discount contractor of the neighborhood? I want to give the cheapest prices because I really want to work for the neighbors and make nothing. No, nobody. Surprised. Okay. How many have felt that competition was too steep, and it must be my competitors that are lowballing because I'm not getting jobs? Okay. Very common. So let's go through what actually gets us into this mindset, right? So number one, the number one excuse that I hear, and that comes up most frequently, is the glass ceiling syndrome. All right. So contractors often price jobs based on perceived customers' payment ability rather than the actual cost and value. This approach can limit potential profit margins and undervalue services. Adjust pricing strategies to reflect true cost value provided to effectively maximize earnings. So, great example of this, all right, is the contractor that changes his price points based on maybe the area that he's traveling into, right? So, you go into a lower class area and then all of a sudden you want to give them breaks. Why? Because I want to get the job. Well, guys, let's put this into perspective. Our pricing model should not be changed around what we think the customer can pay. All right. That's actually very irrelevant. Okay. Pricing for the market. All right. So setting prices based on perceived market tolerance can lead to undervaluation. Focusing solely on market pricing may ignore the unique value proposition and differentiators. Ensuring pricing reflects both market trends and value offered to maintain competitiveness and profitability. So again, this is a perfect example where people they don't actually understand the value they bring to customers and what they do as a unique offer. I see this quite a bit, and they tend to take commodity pricing. All right. So if you're offering a premium service, right? You have foremen, you have, or I mean, you're doing high quality work, working for in hires, but you're charging a commodity price. Where's that lead you? Right? Are we leaving money on the table? 100%. And this is all meant to find the value that your work is actually worth. Okay. So the revenue management, pricing without understanding contribution margins can lead to revenue management. Ignoring the key figures means missing a clear picture of profitability. Incorporate comprehensive financial analysis to ensure effective pricing strategies that enhance overall business profitability. So again, this is basically just saying for revenue management, right? So we're going after revenue, not necessarily maximizing profitability. And I see this all the time. All right, where guys say, "Hey, I've done 1.2 million." Great, but you're still, one paycheck away from being bankrupt. Amazing. You've done well, right? We don't want to be in that boat. So, and again, I've seen some other really unique, excuses come up in this position where, they haven't even tried to charge more, but they're already immediately saying, that they can't. They're telling themselves that it's not possible. I'm already charging the most. I bet you I've heard out of your mouths, few of you guys on here at least. How could I charge more? I'm already charging the most in the market. Great. How do you know that? Are you looking at all your competitors' estimates? How do you know that? Is that your mind playing tricks on you?
I think for us, just to
Hmm.
jump in on what you're saying,
Yep.
is they tell us that we're pricing our estimates higher than everyone else.
Okay.
And that's what they're saying, whether
Hmm.
that's factual or not. But they're like, sorry, we went, someone was, doesn't, you were more expensive or you were higher, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
So you hesitate to increase your pricing because you're like, I'm already getting turned down
Right. So,
when
but
I'm quoting.
is that an emotional reaction to somebody saying you're too high, or is that a mathematical equation?
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I'm just saying that's the feedback we get.
For
So
sure.
the
For sure.
emotional reaction, it's like you're trying to make the right
Hmm.
decisions.
So
So, you have limited facts.
for sure. So now again, if we're in the contractor's shoes, right, and we don't know
Hmm.
our actual numbers on the job, right? So Sue, if you if you and you guys do, so like, hey, listen, um, for the value that we offer, it's like near impossible for somebody else to go out and deliver the same value for a lesser
That's right.
price, right? So at that point, that person's not telling the truth, or they found somebody that's going to do an inferior job, right? When you
Hmm.
know your numbers that well, that's the best time is to thank them for, the opportunity, and when they have a problem, we'll be here to help you, right?
Hmm.
So again, we get that all the time too. And here's where it gets a bit tricky on this particular topic. When guys don't know their numbers, they're actually the biggest threat to the industry. Okay. And there's so many of them out there. And again, it's creating this chaos, it's creating this unawareness of where, what makes a good business, what makes a good offer. Okay. When somebody has no clue of what the last job cost them or what they earned, all right, they're doomed to repeat those mistakes over and over again. So I've heard it, and again, looked at the numbers of that somebody's showing me. We've done job costing, broken down. Like I said, I just shared with you a story where the electrician turned out he's making 18 bucks an hour after all was said and done. Okay, but he had told me out of his own mouth that he couldn't charge more. I'm already losing jobs because I'm too high. I'm overpriced. How could that be? How is that possible that somebody can go in and work for less than $18 an hour? Do you think that's true? Or maybe we could look at it a different way. What if your price was so low that when the customers are seeing it, all right, they're automatically thinking that you're not competitive. You're not a established business, right? So again, what would you do if you're the lowest quote and you come in and there's three guys at 10,000 and you come in at 5,000, all right, to get the job? What's that really saying to the customer? Do you think that they're going to be more confident in you? Nope. Okay. So again, think about these things when we're telling ourselves these stories, right? And most of them are stories we tell ourselves and they're excuses we make. Okay. If you really separated the facts from the bullshit, all right, you're going to find that most of where you are getting your information from is your own head. It's your mind playing tricks on you, especially if you're not job costing, if you don't actually know your numbers, because that's where you get your confidence from when someone does tell you your price is too high. I already know yeah, it may be high, but my value is there, right? The things that you expect to get in this job are already built into this price. So anyone cutting that value means that they're going to subtract something from this job, and that's going to ultimately cost them. So by all means, right? So overhead allocation. So this is a big one that I see very, very, very often. All right. So failing to allocate overhead by department may lead to inaccurate cost assessments. This oversight can negatively impact pricing strategies. Accurately distributing overhead ensures each project is approximately priced, contributing to more precise financial planning and profitability. So, how many of you here know your exact overhead allocations? Okay, a few of you. Maybe give me a one in the chat so I know what I'm working with here. We got one. Yikes. I hope there's more.
We might not call it the same thing personally, just because this is
Right.
newer to me to do that CEO financials.
Hmm.
But I mean, we might. We are pretty detailed on everything.
Right. So there's a pattern in the most successful companies that I encounter and work with, and uh, um, that is that we are looking at overhead allocation as its own separate entity on your job costs, right? So why does overhead so important? Why is it so important to pay attention to it? Because in your overhead, you basically have two buckets. Okay. So you have a variable overhead expense. That's things like gas. Those are things that go up and down on a monthly basis. All right. And then you have your fixed overhead expenses. So those are the expenses that you have that basically are fixed: rent, insurance, stuff like that on a monthly basis. Okay. What happens is when we go through a period of slow times, all right, does your overhead go down? No. Maybe some of your variables might go down, all right? And then how do we recover that period of slow time, right? So if you have a shoulder month and you go through that and your revenue drops, okay, and you don't properly catch it, how are you going to add that into your pricing for the following month? All right. So what ends up happening is we have a slow month, we drop our prices even more, all right, cutting further instead of we actually have to raise our prices, right? Because we slowed down, our overhead is still there. It doesn't disappear. And smart owners aren't letting overhead they're not putting that in and mixing that up with profit, right? They're not seeing that as profit. They're separating it. Okay? And again, when you have a bad month, the following months that come are months you need to distribute that overhead onto. All right. So again, if you didn't do any work in January, all right, that means February and March's overhead is higher. Therefore, your prices should be higher than what you could have charged at the beginning of January. Does that make sense?
Hey, Molly.
Right.
So honey,
So once again, this is another area where we make mistakes. So missing the big picture, not including overhead, commissions, net profit in pricing, overlooks critical profitability components. Neglecting these factors can undermine the financial health. Always incorporate these elements, fully understand costs, ensuring comprehensive pricing strategies that sustain business growth. Okay. So missing the big picture again is not having a system of understanding your numbers. Okay. Understanding on a job by job basis of where you actually made profit and what real net profit is. Okay. So net profit is after all expenses, overhead, cogs, your labor, materials, your commissions, after everything, what's left for you? What can you say that you've earned on that job? Okay. Now, does that go up and down? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to say firsthand that again, you would have fluctuations, and why contractors fail at such a high rate is because of the high variables they have. All right. Are we doing the exact same job every single day in, day out? Ever once? All right. Many of us aren't, right? Only some of us could be so lucky as doing the exact same thing, same revenue, same, but we're not. We are basically on every project starting a new business, right? We have a new customer. Think about it. We're moving locations, we're moving equipment, we're moving, like, everything is changing. Okay. Variables change. So if you don't have a system of looking at those patterns as you're going through the changes, what's going to happen, all right, is again, you're going to start to work really, really hard and have less and less to show for it. Okay. The classic example of this is when we start to grow our business and become broke, right? But why? I doubled my business. I doubled my productivity. I did twice as much. I worked harder. And now I'm in more trouble. I'm in debt. How can that be? How many of you have had that conversation with yourself at night? Don't lie now. Put a one in the chat if you've had that. I'll put it in myself. I've definitely had that conversation with myself. Right? Okay. So, and this is again, it comes down to patterns and systems, right? So markup versus margin confusion. This is one that I see all the time, and I can't understand it. But a lot of times we misinterpret the difference between markup and margin. It's vital. It's vital in the pricing. So markup may increase the price without ensuring sufficient margins. While margin focuses on profitability, clarity between these terms helps set a strategic prices and secure desired profit objectives. Anybody explain to me what the difference between markup and margin is? Probably not too many.
If I can.
Yeah,
I'm trying
absolutely.
to learn here, bud. I heard
Sure.
it as markup is in the moment, margin is the standard.
That's actually pretty good. That's pretty good.
Oh, sweet.
So margins, what you actually retain, right? So again, when you're using a markup or a markup percentage, okay, what's important to understand is that that's not actually what you're going to retain. Okay. So knowing the difference between your markup and your margin are super important. All right. And again, a lot of guys misinterpret that when we're on calls or we're looking at their financials and they say, but why? I
Margin,
marked it up 30%.
your margin is how
Okay.
much money you're taking home. Your
So
markup is how much you are increasing your product
okay.
and your product and your clients and whatnot.
Yep. That's another,
So
it's sort of an interpretation. Yeah. So again, in terms of your margin, it's what you're retaining, right? So like again, at the end of the day, like you're marking up to earn a margin, right? You want to maintain a margin. Okay. So undercutting the competition. Who here has undercut the competition or has this invisible war going on? One of my favorites, right? Reducing prices to outbid competitors can erode profit margins and devolve services. This approach risks creating unsustainable pricing models instead of differentiate through quality or unique services. Focusing on value, maintain reasonable profitable pricing. So again, if you are the type of contractor that goes out there and says, "Hey, I do quality work, I show up on time, and you can trust me," all right, you're probably going to be in a situation where you're being compared to every other contractor that comes through the door and can fall victim to having to compete on the only thing left on the table, and that's price, right? So the best example, three guys show up, all say the same, look the same, offer the same thing. What does a customer choose on? What's left to choose on? It's price. Okay. So in that situation, instead of looking inward and going, hey, what makes me different? What value do I offer besides the stupidly obvious ones that customers expect? Has anybody rolled up to their job and said, hey, you know what? I can do a mediocre job, like semi par. I'm going to steal your deposit though. Anybody, nobody told their customers that? No, not even once, just to kind of give them a deal. No, no, right? So stop doing that, right? Think about it. If you feel you have to undercut the competition, all right, you better have a good hard look at your business and how long you plan to stay in business. Because if that's the only thing left that you have to compete with, you're doing it wrong, right? That means that you don't have anything that differentiates you besides possibly being able to swing a hammer. Oh, let me just mute that. Hold on. Okay. So please, guys, don't do that. Now, this one might be a bit controversial. I don't really mind, pissing off a few people here, but the cost plus method covers only direct costs and gross profit, potentially underestimating the total project expenses. To avoid eroding profit margins, ensure all indirect costs and desired profit are included in pricing formula for sustainable profitability. So what I'm going to say here is I've met some very, very wealthy cost plus builders that are super happy and they're doing a great job and they have a super high end clientele. But I've also met some very broke ones that are doing things inaccurately. All right. What I find with the cost plus method is you better be very, very well versed in financials and understanding systems, because it's difficult. All right. If you're not on a management accounting system, and I'm going to briefly explain that, and you're relying on a regulatory accounting system to bill your customer. Okay. So, regulatory accounting system, real quick for everybody, is a system that is like QuickBooks. All right. It's designed to report your income to the government. It's always behind. Okay. It looks into the past of what you've already done. Right. Hard to make predictions for the future and look ahead. All right. But being behind in billing and being behind in understanding your expenses leaves you with a gap. Okay. Now, management accounting, all right, is everything from your job cost codes to your schedules, to your budgets, your job costing. And the whole purpose of it is to act independently of your regulatory system. All right. And to help you actually make decisions in the future. Okay. To help you predict costs, help you to, generate, again, good job costing, good WIP reports, understanding your work in progress. And a lot about managing customers' expectations is being ahead in your projects, right? So this comes down to when you start to have problems with invoicing, when you start to have problems with understanding your true costs and what you should be billing to a customer in a cost plus method. So there's a good saying for this: garbage in, garbage out. Meaning, again, if you're not organized and you don't have a good system in place to maintain these costs and understand them, then chances are you're going to underbill your customers and they're going to get a really great value out of you, but you're not necessarily going to earn a profit, and it's going to be a lot of chaos on that end, right? So what's the answer to solving these problems? Okay, what's the solutions that we can look at? I've come up over the last few years and actually after over the last few decades, I should say, a method that keeps me in complete control of my financials, and it's really simple. I'm a contractor, right? I don't know about you guys, but when I look at balance sheets and profit and loss statements and all the things that our accountants and bookkeepers produce, I'm it doesn't help me to run my business. Okay. How many here has your accountant doing cash flow projections accurately? How many of you guys here, and I'll open up the chat to see, maybe even give me a one. If your accountant or bookkeepers ever come to you and said, "Hey, I think you're underpricing this line item." Anybody ever had that experience yet? Okay. How many of your accountants or bookkeepers have been able to produce an accurate budget for you? Oh, it sounds like crickets. But isn't that what they're paid to do? Isn't that why we hire them? The answer is no. Okay, so again, let's get into the real world. There are some very good accountants and bookkeepers out there that are probably capable of doing these things for you. But the reality is that they're trained to report to the government. That is the majority of their job. All right. And by being dependent on them, leaves a big gap in our business. It's our responsibility as a contractor to use management accounting processes, all right, and to know where we stand financially. So how do we do this? What are the steps that we have to follow? So the first step is to calculate your break even per job. Okay. So for anybody that's seen our job cost sheet, it should be very clear, black and white, what your labors, materials, overhead, how much is this job going to cost you before you break even? At what point? Is anybody here doing that kind of job costing? Give me a one in the chat. Let me see how many of us are doing that. Okay. Okay, that's an interesting way. So on the hours, yeah. Okay. So now that let's say we have our job costing, we all know what labor is, we all know what material is. We should have our overhead allocations in there, knowing what our overhead actually costs us. Okay. You can use that as a percentage, right? So if you're projecting to do $1 million worth of business, and you have $300,000 worth of expenses that are overhead allocations. All right. Pretty easy to come up with a percentage there, right? That's 30% of your revenue. Okay. Now, another important note when you're calculating labor, all right, guys, it's important that we're putting on the labor burdens and calculating our labor burden for what it actually costs us per man hour. Okay. We have training for this. If anybody's interested, I'm not going to get deep into that. We have tons of job cost training. It's free. It's in our school network. It's on our Facebook group. Job costing, same thing. All right. So what I want you guys to see is the formula. The formula that you need to apply, in my humble opinion, all right, is once you know what your break even is, I want you to add a minimum or work to getting to a minimum of 33%. Okay. So for a lot of you, if you're calculating that could be a 60 to 70%, 80% markup. What about cost labor wise of washing, drying, and repainting a deck? All the same. All the same. So when you're taking your job costs, all right, you have labor and material, right, guys? And then we might have a subcontractor, which would be other rentals. That would be other. Okay. We're going to boil that down, add in our overhead, right? So again, whatever your overhead may be. By the way, I've yet to see anybody that has less than a 20% of revenue overhead. Okay. If you do, if you do, you're not really in business. You're faking it. Okay. Any established business out there that I've come across, even in all sizes and configurations, all right, they're running about 20 upwards to 30 or 40% in overhead expenses, right? If you were to calculate it as a percentage of their revenue. Okay. So again, if you feel that you are under that, then I would at least put a 20% overhead allocation onto your price. Okay. So again, starting with a 30%, 33%, that's where we want to get to. The lowest you can go, guys, the lowest we can go is a 20% margin. After that, your business isn't growing. It's not even surviving. Okay. How many of you guys agree with that? I want someone to disagree with me. Anybody feel they can run their business for less than 20% margin successfully? If you do, feel free to unmute yourself and let's have a chat about it. Anybody here feel that you could? Okay. All right. So now, if we know what our break even is on a job, and somebody tells us that, and we've added our 20%, let's say in the worst case scenario, we added 20% margin to our job. And that only time we would add that 20% margin is if we have no backlog, right? So this is how it's going to work. Your backlog, that's the amount of work that you have already sold and that is waiting for you to produce, okay, should dictate the supply and demand in your business. Okay. So if I have only 1 week of backlog, all right, I can adjust my margins. I can try and be more aggressive on there. But the guy that doesn't adjust the margin, all right, and gets a 3, 6, 9 month backlog, what is he doing? Anybody tell me what they're doing?
Suffocating, running around with their head cut off, feeling super stressed, more work than they can handle.
Right. Okay. So they're essentially leaving money on the table, right? So again, once we get to that comfort zone of backlog, let's say it's 90 days, what I would tell you to do is start to raise your prices by 5% increments, right? Until you bring that demand back down. Okay. There's a good, healthy balance there. If you're looking at your closing percentages, has anybody here tracked their closing percentages? Anybody? What if it's a 30-day, not a 90-day? Okay, so again, on 30 days, backlog, like that's a little close for comfort, but it all depends, right? So it depends on the next thing that we're going to discuss here is understanding your sales, right? How many leads, how many opportunities do we have in our pipeline? One of the biggest mistakes that I'm coming across is clients not really understanding the value of their pipeline and like the closing percentages where they should be. So do you think the guy that closes at 10%, so for every 10 new opportunities he gets, he only closes one? Is that sustainable? Anybody can sustain themselves on that? I would sure hope not. Okay, but a lot of you guys are. Now, that may be two things. Okay. That could be a sales and marketing issue, which most times it is. All right. An offer issue. Okay. Meaning that we're not making the right offer to the right people. Okay. But most of the time, what we see in there, in that situation is that they were probably underpricing. They don't have any sales skills. They're just sending out estimates to customers. Okay. And then they're living off what they get as a lay down sale. Right. So there's something broken in that scenario. The very odd time that we do come across it, their prices could very well be too high. Okay. that's a real thing, that you can hit certain ceilings, right? Or they need to differentiate their offer. Okay. But what about the guy that's closing 90 to 100% of his deals? Well, he surely must be doing better, right? Anybody think it's good to close 90 or 100% of their deals?
He's priced too low.
That bingo. Okay. So you never want to be selling at 90 to 100% of your deals. That means you've left money on the table. And I'm going to explain to you why. Okay. So there's some very good studies, and I know it to be true. About half the population, all right, is price sensitive. Okay. Meaning their biggest fear or concern is paying too much for something. That's their first concern or fear. Okay. So that's 50% of the population. The other 50% of the population is value orientated. Their biggest fear is not getting a good contract or having a great experience. Like price becomes lower on the issues list for them. Okay. So if we're selling 100%, that means that we're selling to people that are price sensitive and we're leaving too much money on the table, because I've yet to see anybody that's that good on sales that can sell at 100% and high margin. They don't come together. All right. Unless you're in a very protected niche market. All right. Where it's, an unfair monopoly. Okay. I've yet to see one though in any contracting scenario, and I've seen a lot. Okay. Either way, if you're at 100%, okay, guys, or if you're above 70 or 80, you can afford to start raising your prices. Okay. You're leaving money on the table. Okay. Now, for the guy that's doing 10% close ratio, all right, what does he do in that situation? Can he afford to raise his prices? Anybody help me out? Can he afford to raise his prices? The answer is yes and maybe. Okay. So first and foremost, is he achieving that 30% or 33% margin? That's sort of a benchmark. I'd like to see companies making 40 and 50. And I have clients that are on this call that are making that proudly and above that. Especially you service technicians and service work guys. That's very doable. But the answer to that is, again, first looking at the margin, right? If he's got a low margin and a low closing ratio, all right, then he's got a sales and marketing issue. Okay. If he has a very high margin, all right, and a low closing ratio, he's got an offer issue, right? Meaning his offer isn't directed at the right people that can afford to pay for the value that he's looking to charge. All right. In the very rare case where the number, he's at a 70 or 80% margin, then maybe he can afford to bring down his price slightly. Okay. So let's think about this as a way of knowing if we're actually on target or off target. So according to IBS World, all right, the average contractor profit margin is 9%. Okay. And I believe it to be even less than that. That's counting established contractors. Okay. There's a lot of contractors here that are still getting going, that their numbers are even lower than that. Okay. So top performers in the market, I can say easily, are between 30 and 50% margin, if not higher. Okay. So let's put this into a scenario, right? So we've got a guy doing 28K revenue in a month, 1K in profit. All right. If he changed up and put in a better margin, he may end up doing 30K a month at 6K in profit. What would you prefer? Pretty silly question, right? Pretty silly question. Okay. So what can you do about this today? What can we do about this for the guys that are aware of their numbers? Your very first step, or sorry, for the guys that are unaware of their numbers. Anybody that's in this room right now that can't actively do their job costing or is not actively doing their job costing, I suggest that you start with that very first thing. All right. Knowing your numbers is a habit. Okay. You have to form a habit I know that not everybody loves to do it. The more you can build it into the management accounting system of your business, all right, the more you can build it into your workflow as being, you know, a part of the process. So, for example, when you're giving out an estimate, you should know in your estimate what your margins are. You should know what your predicted profits are. All right. That makes it very easy to compare to the actual as you're running the job. Okay. And that's essentially what you're doing in job costing. You're comparing your estimated versus your actual, and then figuring out where the discrepancies and the variances are. Okay. So if you guys are doing job costing, all right, or if you're not, I want you to pull your last 3 jobs and run the real numbers. So labor, material, overhead, everything we've talked about. Um, and add a 33% to that cost. What was the price you needed to be? Okay. If you're not at that 20 or 30%, okay, between 20 and 30% as the minimum, all right, as and a margin, I would start to raise your prices by 10%. Okay. And just say nothing. Try it. That's the easiest quick win I can say. Most of us in this room here today could raise their price 10% and not too many people are going to say anything about it. Problem is a lot of clients want discounts, especially if they're in the military. So I get this a lot. And again, when I hear this, James, I'm going to assume a couple things when I hear this. I would be curious to know what kind of advertising and marketing you're doing to be in front of those type of clients consistently. Number two is how are we handling objections, right? So this is a sales thing. And how are we positioning our offer? All right. So most of the time, when we're running into these issues or we're running into these roadblocks where we feel stuck, we feel like we can't charge more, we can't get more money. All right. The first step is to understand your numbers from the numbers. All right. So from the clients you're doing business with, if you're only getting a 9% margin on each job, all right, you're basically at that point working for wages. Let's just put this in perspective. Okay. So the guy that goes out and does $1 million worth of work, takes on all the liability, all the risk, right? Insurances, all the, the day in, day out heavy lifting on that business. And he only has $90,000 to show for that, which would probably be absorbed into other parts of the business. Is that sustainable?
You may as well stay at home and sleep.
You may as well go get a job. You can make $90,000 somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So again, you have to reflect on this. It's not worth the risk, the challenge, the grind. And a lot of times, guys, what I'm trying to communicate here is it's an easier problem to fix the broken numbers, all right, than it is to, quit and burn down the business and try over again, right? Or go work for someone. A lot easier, but you have to be prepared and be willing to slow down to speed up. First of all, learning good management skills. Okay. These are habits that you form. And the truth be told, most of us don't form the habit until we've ran our business into the ground. Right. If I had to be honest, somebody could have told me 20 years ago, hey, this is how you do your numbers. I would have been like, great. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And go in one ear and out the other. It wasn't until I actually experienced, all right, what running out of cash meant, which had, what having suppliers chasing me around, what, doing all this huge amount of work and not having anything to show of it. That real pain is what I share with you today. And smart guys take the advice and learn from other people's mistakes, right? So when you're thinking about running a business and you're a contractor at any single level, if you're a startup all the way up to, I've seen guys running $20-30 million business not have a clue about their numbers. Okay. The very first step and the first way to actually get control, all right, is to start with your job costing, to start to control your business through a management accounting process that allows you to see what you're actually making. Okay. If you're not making, all right, what the top end of the market is making, that 30 to 50% for premium, contractors, all right, then you're not charging the most. So you can take that illusion out of your head. You can definitely charge more. Now, what this may lead you to find out, in most cases it does, is that, hey, we can't survive off of just referrals. You know, mom's referrals don't really work out. They're very price sensitive clients, right? You know, and oftentimes when we have a C or a D client, they're referring us to what? C and D clients. Okay. So here's the big aha moment that I want you guys to have in your job costing is when you realize, okay, that charging more doesn't cost you customers. Charging more prevents you from encountering bad customers. Okay. Bad customers want things for free. Bad customers, bad people for your business, okay, want you to work for free. They expect you to work for free. Okay. Who here wants to work for free? Okay. So if we want to change this, the first step is knowing that when that person tells you, oh, I've got 3 other quotes and you're the highest, okay, they're lying flat out. And if you did find 3 other people that are lower than me, good luck to you with that. Okay. Because again, at the end of the day, the smart contractors, the guys that know what they're doing and are going to be around a long time, know you can't work for free, not for any extended period of time. Okay. The only freedom you're going to find in this business, all right, is when you do learn these 2 things. In my humble opinion, and I know it might be controversial, but when you learn to sell and market, all right, and you combine that with knowing numbers and managing businesses, like managing your business, all right, beautiful thing happens. You realize very quickly that there was never money in doing the work. You will never successfully operate a business by being the doer. Okay. You can't make enough. You can't do enough. All right. What we need to focus on is being a business owner and being a CEO of your business. I'm not even going to say it. Maybe I will. I'll say it. Does anybody tell me what the role and the responsibility of the CEO is in every business? Mario, can you tell me what it is?
Make money for the shareholders.
That's right. That's it. You have a responsibility to earn a profit for your shareholder. Who's your shareholder? Who should it be? It should be you. All right. That's your responsibility. It's not an option. All right. If you were a CEO and let's say you're the shareholder and your CEO is out there undercharging, running around doing the work themselves, all right, would you keep that CEO or trust him with your returns? Probably not, right? Right. So again, Sergio, here's the analysis of this, brother. All of us start off, most of us, I should say, not all of us, start off as being doers. Okay, that's the very first level of your business. All right, we have to be the doer. Okay, the second level of your business and where you get to by learning these things that I'm teaching with you. This one thing, job costing, selling, marketing, like in a simple form. Okay, is you end up realizing that you have to become a delegator. Okay, so a delegator is like your project managers. That's your sales team. That's the people that that help run a business and delegate to others, delegate to the doers, help to make the doers' jobs smoother. Okay, most of us are here as doers trying to move to delegators. Okay, above that and the top level of the pyramid, all right, is your designers. Okay, those are the people, the executive level, your CEOs, all right, that design systems for everyone to work smoothly in. All right. So if you can keep that in mind when when you're trying to put these things in place and prioritize them, all right, what brain and what level are you working at? All right. Are you designing a business that's going to have scale, that's going to be able to grow? All right. The designer would design the pricing, would they not? They're going to hand that down to the delegators, who's going to push that through to the doers. Okay. But if you're doing everything and you're not at least putting these infrastructures in place and designing a business that can scale, all right, you're not going to ever be able to afford the delegators or other people to do things for you. Right? You'll stay stuck. So let me ask you, how many of you people, and you can just drop a raise it in the chat if you're going to today raise your price. I'm gonna take this one action step. Who's raising their price? Okay. Who's still scared to raise their price? Okay. So here's my offer for you guys. Anybody that's here that's still afraid of raising their price, I will give you a 15-minute pricing strategy. You bring with you a recent job that you've done. Okay. Labor, material, bring me your numbers. We'll sit down together for 50 minutes and I'll show you what your prices need to be. All right. Anybody wants to book that 15-minute call? We'll go through this and I'll show you the fastest, easiest way to know if you need to raise your prices or not. Okay. At the end of the day, guys, this isn't rocket science. Many successful contractors have mastered this and figured it out. But if you haven't, and you're still sitting there not knowing what you should be pricing, okay, for God's sakes, get some help. All right. Take that next step. Have the courage to look at those numbers, even if you don't understand them. All right. And or work with someone that does. Okay. And get the right numbers. Stop making the same mistakes. Okay. Because if you continue to underprice, all right, your work, I mean, continue to work for cheaper than you can afford to, all right, you're going to stay very stuck. It's a nasty circle that you end up being in. Okay. Even for guys that know their numbers, oftentimes struggle with if they should raise their prices or not. Okay. At the end of the day, again, we talked about the mindsets. We've talked about, the things that prevent us from raising prices and understanding those economics. Sometimes it's just somebody looking at your watch and telling you what time it is. All right. I'm more than happy to look at your watch and tell you what time it is. So if you're struggling at any level with pricing or pricing strategy, I'd love to chat with you. And I hope everyone's gotten some value from our call today. And I hope that you guys are taking action. Everybody can take action on this. Check your prices. Be looking to raise your prices and maximize your profits. Thanks so much. We'll talk soon.